And so we'll go ahead and move forward. We're moving the agenda around just a little bit in that I wanted to cover the questions at the beginning and then cover some of the presentation type of conversations closer to the end of our talk today. And so we received an email request for information over the residency listserv from Gretchen from Pamlico Community College. And it was a really good question, and I felt like it had a lot of good information in it. And we really appreciate the people on the listserv being willing to share their ideas, share what they do at their colleges, because I believe that that is very helpful. And so if you're following along on the phone or on the PDF, we're on slide number 3. And I asked Gretchen though, so that way I'm not the one doing all the talking. Hopefully you were able to join us today, Gretchen, to kind of share what your problem was and then what the responses were you got from your colleagues. So Gretchen, were you able to make it today? Gretchen, we'll give you one more second to see if you were able to join us and to share your experience. I'm not seeing you in the participant list, so I'll just go ahead and talk about her scenario for her. She had a student submit an application and she has some residency dates there, and then they are allowing her to register after the start date. But then she received an error in RGN saying that there was no valid rate table built. And it was because there was an issue and it wasn't being billed correctly. They've had this happen before, and they had to go to IT to have it manually adjusted and updated. And she wanted to know if others had experienced something similar. And so we got answers from Kim Hill, from Lenore, Sarah from Blue Ridge. There may have been some other answers that I didn't see the responses to. And it was a variety of suggestions to go to XRDO, excuse me, and XRDIR to update some of the changes. Also, some changes have to be made on SAP, and you can see that on slide number 3 here. I don't want to take the time to read it to you because I know everybody can read. Also needing to check your dates on Riot and making sure your spring 2021 semester is updated correctly, your CU semester, of course. And Gretchen Marie had replied that all of that had helped and fixed it. It was primarily due to some updates that needed to happen on Riot and ACTM. So before I move on off of this slide, is Kim or Sarah or Gretchen on, and you would like to add any more detail to what I've just kind of described as the scenario that happened here?
JW, this is Kim at Lenore.
Oh, hey,
We've had
Kim.
we've had this problem several times, and for us, it's just that the application, when you do it, it RDS pulls in the date of the application. So if you're
Mhm.
processing that application after the start of the semester, you just got to make sure all your dates pull back to that first day of that semester so that RDS will recognize it. And a lot of times, once you fix everything in your system, if you run that number back through RDS, it automatically corrects. That's what I was trying to tell her. The other part is more of a registrar issue, so
Mhm.
I don't know that part as well.
Understood. Understood. So thank you, Kim, for adding a little more depth to that answer. I appreciate it. Sarah or Gretchen, anything you guys want to add? Okay, not hearing any comments, so we'll go ahead and move on. But before we do so, though, I really want to thank everybody on the listserv. Your expertise from your sister institutions and your colleagues is the only way that we can get timely troubleshooting done, especially in these kind of scenarios. So I appreciate your willingness to share what you've learned and your willingness to ask questions when you run into issues that you're going, wow, this is weird. Um, So thank you for doing that, and I really appreciate it. We'll go ahead and move on to slide number 4. And these are a couple of questions that we've received through the agenda item request that was sent out a week or so ago. And this first question is, if a student is initially deemed out of state at the start of the term, then they switch back to in-state during the term. We've had this question happen several times with this scenario, that then the person was out of state, now they're in state in the term, and the system, the colleague system generates, especially when bill is run, generates a refund. Or if the other scenario happens, they were in state and then they flipped to out of state, then they end up with a charge, right? But this question is specifically dealing with the potential of a refund. And the answer to the question is, well, before I answer the question, I'd like the participants to get ready because I'd really like to hear your all's feedback, because part of her question is there an alternative process to running XRDS and XRDO in order to get these changes to happen? But to answer the policy question first, the college system is correctly designed to either charge or credit a student account if the residency changes, status changes, even when the effective date is in the past. So when RDS delivers, when you download an update and you receive a classification change and that effective date is in the current semester or in a previous semester, then colleague, when you run bill for either one of those semesters, colleague will update the charges for that student account, because our process and policy is that whatever the charges are for the current semester, and the current semester is defined as the semester that includes the effective date, then colleague will adjust those charges or credits on that student account. If that results in a refund, then the student is allowed to receive that refund, and that is a state. Those are state funds. Those are not interinstitutional funds or anything like that. So those are state funds. So at this time, I kind of like to pause to see if there's anybody participating today that knows of an alternative process other than XRDS or XRDO to help answer this question.
JW, this is Gwen at Forsyth Tech.
Hey, Gwen.
Hi. If the student is going from out to in, there's not really an alternative for that. You have to pull in the information so that the student, because the table has to be updated, the rate table, in order for the student to get their in-state tuition. And it always goes back to the beginning of the semester, actually, regardless of what part of the semester the student goes from out to in. Now, if the student goes from in to out, we normally code the student depending on how far into the semester we are. We will code the student with the LVOS to allow them to have the in-state tuition for that semester with an end date, because if it was late verified, then we don't penalize the student, but they will go to out of state the following semester until they fix whatever it is.
Yeah, thank you, Gwen, for bringing up that student type, because you're exactly correct that if a student flips from in-state to out-of-state after the 10% point of the term or the course, then the college can apply the LVOS student type that will adjust the student's charges to in-state tuition for that semester, but it's only for that semester. You can't let that go into future semesters. So thank you, Gwen.
JW,
Yes.
they also need to run bill. After they run
Yes.
XRDO, bill is required in the middle of a term.
Excellent. Thank you. I think that was Joyce. Thank you for
Yes.
that reminder. Yeah. That you need to make sure you run bill, and that would be for any semesters in the past as well, if those charges happen to be in previous semesters. Is that right, Joyce?
We also
Yeah.
let financial aid know after a bill has been
Yes.
applied.
Thank you. I don't know for sure who said that, but you are exactly right. We got to make sure because RDS works in partnership with the state grant system and financial aid. And so anytime there's some unusual changes like this, definitely need to make sure that financial aid is aware. Thank you for making that highlight.
JW, JW, this is
Yes.
Joyce again. We stopped sending it to financial aid when we do a bill. What I do instead is when I run my reports in the morning, I get a save list of all of those and I send that to financial aid so they can run the entire save list. Because sometimes it might not be a student that's going through bill, but they need to know about it.
And this is when, again, if for some reason, like we do, summer and fall registration together, and summer and fall registration normally happens in the midst of spring, of course. So there shouldn't be, as long as you put an end date on the LVOS, the future semesters should be when they run bill, it should kick them to out of state, even though they registered during the time they had the LVOS.
Excellent. Thank you, Gwen and Joyce. And then I was getting ready to ask the follow-up question that's already in the chat box. And that is what report, I guess this is for Joyce, can be run to give you a heads up that a student's RDS will expire in the middle of the term? Or is there something that you can do to identify potential changes as well, not just the expiration? So could we get some feedback from participants on that topic?
JW, this is Joyce again. It's just our normal daily reports, the XRDIR, and then we run it through some Informer reports that we put up so we don't have to look through that however many pages that XRDIR report is.
Gotcha. Excellent. Thank you. And it as far as how often are those reports being run, it sounds like, Joyce, you run those every day. How about
Yes.
other colleges? I didn't mean to cut you off, Joyce. I apologize. What were you going to say?
For the most part, I do run them daily. If I'm out, they can wait a couple of days, but I run them for the entire span from the last time I ran it to the present.
Excellent. So if anybody does run that report other than daily, can you kind of put your schedule in the chat box real quick and kind of give us an idea? Do you do it every other day, monthly, weekly, whatever the case may be?
Hi, JW. This is Jessica Johnson from Wake Tech. I just wanted to add one thing. If a student is going from out of state to in-state in the middle of a term, if the student has dropped or withdrawn from a course, when you rebill them, those courses that have been dropped or withdrawn will retain that out-of-state rate. So you'll have to manually go in and adjust those for students so that everything gets converted to the in-state rate.
Very interesting. If I knew that, I had forgotten that. And so thank you for sharing that with everybody. We do have a request to share the Informer report that some of the colleges may use to filter through that XDIR report, which sounds like it's a fairly large report. So if anybody would like to share that with L'Oreal Butler at Carteret, I think that she would find that very helpful. Any other suggestions or comments before we change topics? All right, thank you, everybody. I appreciate that. We're going to go ahead and move to slide 5, and now we're starting to get to some of the questions that I didn't have time to really do well at researching, and I apologize for that. But I really think that this question, to be honest about it, is beyond the scope of what we could cover in just this meeting. But we hear you loud and clear that we need some training around DACA, foreign-born students, emancipated minors, and any of those other special type of circumstances and what that might mean to your processing residency at the local level. And I don't want to put Jean or Tracy on the spot, but I'm going to. And I apologize for not giving you a heads up on this, Jean or Tracy. But from an RDS perspective, how does RDS handle the interview? And then through appeals and so forth, how do you guys handle non-U.S. citizens when it comes from RDS perspective? And while you're thinking about your answer, I have talked to Dr. Hickman, who's going to be working with Jean Ritter, and we'll introduce Jean Ritter here in a little bit, about a community college specific residency training. So Monty is working on that, and hopefully that'll become available in the next couple of months. But in the meantime, Jean or Tracy, do you guys have any thoughts or comments about non-U.S. citizens and RDS?
I'm gonna let Gene take that because he's more familiar with the interview than I am.
Yeah, okay, good morning. So most of those issues have specific questions built in. So the interviews they're going through is based on skip logic. So if you tell us you're a U.S. citizen, it's not going to go to the immigration modules. So so most of this is actually already built in. If they indicate they're an emancipated minor, either by court order or marriage, it gives them provisions for that. Yeah, some of these where you have an issue where they don't have contact with one parent or another, sometimes those may end up in an appeal, is the short answer. But a lot of these are answered. There's information on our website and the beginning of the interview actually about specific to DACA students, as well as what immigration statuses are eligible. So a lot of that is covered on the interview. A student in the meantime always has the option of calling the RDS call center, explaining their situation. If they have a question how best to come through the interview, and they can, would probably be the short answer to that. But yeah, a lot of these issues are covered, you know, in the interview as options for the students if they start to answer that. And let me just mention one thing that comes up frequently is like, well, but they're not living with their parent. They're estranged or something. They don't have to be living with a parent. If a parent's here in North Carolina, we can verify that. We've had parent was incarcerated or they're just estranged or whatever. We can work with that. So there are provisions in the interview to do that. And if it's an unusual one that doesn't pass through, have them go to an appeal and or call the call center and they'll walk them through it.
JW, this is Joyce again. I noticed you said that you were going to send it up to Dr. Hickman. I actually did the foreign-born residents in relationship to our student types. And I also sent him something for student types just to give us another campus responsibility with documents that would help us.
Excellent, thank you. And so I don't know if Monty was able to make the call today, but as he's developing that, Joyce, I'm sure that he wouldn't mind some suggestions of what we need in that training. And I'll kind of throw that out to the entire audience. We want to make sure that the training is valuable to you in meeting your needs. And so if there's other specific things you feel like need to be covered in the residency training for community colleges, then please email Monty Hickman or myself, and we'll make sure that's included in the agenda. So thank you, Joyce.
You echoed exactly what I was about to say, JW. So again, if you have anything that you want covered on the training, this is Monty, by the way, please send me an email. I will be working with Jean and Jesse Cross also, so we can make sure we get something essential for you. So again, if you have anything that you want covered in that training, please let me know. Enjoy seeing that again. Thanks.
Thank you, Monty, and I appreciate you taking that huge ball and getting that together for us. We've desperately been needing that, and I appreciate you working on it, man. Not a couple of things in the chat box I do want to highlight, especially for those of you that might be on the phone. There's Heather says that Azu says that there's some actually very good resources on the RDS page for students who are DACA or whose parents are undocumented when they are citizens. And I would like to echo that the RDS web page has more than just a portal to get to the interview. There's some very good information out there, even some one-pager handouts that you can print off and share with applicants and students as they're working through the process. And I believe some of that is even in Spanish. Isn't that correct, Gene?
Yes.
Are there any that you would like to highlight, Gene, some of those resources?
No, in particular, I mean, there's several of them out there. Some of them are geared more toward like high school counselors, especially, or to parents, particularly about the immigration issues. But yeah, there's a lot of good information out there that actually gives them screenshots and walks them through how to get through the system.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you, Gene. I appreciate that. And Heather, thank you for sharing the link to that specific page on the NC Residency website. I appreciate that. And Elizabeth, we have not set the dates for the training yet because we're still developing the content. So as soon as we get a little further down the path of developing the content, we'll definitely announce those dates for future RDS training. Thank you, everybody, for that conversation. I'll pause just a second to make sure we don't have anything else we need to cover on that slide. All right, great information, friends. I appreciate that. We'll go on to the next one, and Joyce Craig and I have been discussing this along with several others of you for quite some time, and we ended up on a pause a little bit of what's the difference between lawfully present and legally admitted, especially when it comes to some of the specific community college exemptions, like the public high school graduate. And John Harris has been researching that. He's our System Office General Counsel. And you'll understand here in a few minutes when we get to the SEAA update and the System Office update of why we kind of ended up having to take a pause on this, because we're actually working on a potential draft bill that may assist in some of this, and also probably will make it even a little more complicated, to be honest about it. However, I did not have time, and I apologize, to coordinate to have John available on this residency update call to talk about lawfully present and legally admitted. I will invite him to the next call to help us get some clarification, especially with the public high school graduate. So I think the big concern with this question is a person legally enters the United States on a visa of some type. They graduate from a public high school, but they let their visa expire. Are they still eligible for the public high school graduate exemption? And I think that's at the heart of the question for John, and hopefully we'll get an answer to that at our next one. So thank you for your patience. I know we've had this one up on our slides for several times now, and I apologize that we haven't gotten you a solid answer yet. Did that help? Did I clarify that right, Joyce?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much. Do you mind if I invite my counterpoints to the next meeting?
Oh, yes, sure.
Okay, that would help us out tremendously. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And Joyce, thanks for mentioning that, because this is definitely not a closed meeting to only residency liaison officers or admissions and registrars only. As we mentioned earlier, sometimes it may be important for financial aid to participate, or veteran services, or other functional areas that work with students. So this is definitely an open meeting, and please feel free to invite anybody that would like to listen in and participate.
Thank you.
All right, so let's go on and move to Tracy Mitchell, who's the RDS Guru Director. And let's see, Tracy, I believe you're on the phone. And for those of you following along in the PDF, we're on slide number 8. I think that Tracy, we had 3 bullets on your slide. One was the second quarter stats, the RDS releases, and then RDS and state grants, and then anything else, of course, that you might want to talk about. So Tracy, the mic is yours.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. The quarterly statistics kind of speak for themselves, and you can see that we're down almost 13% total students using RDS, and that pretty much bears through on all of the statistics. Just an overall decrease, and an overall decrease including the number of calls the RDS call center has gotten. And I guess people know that things are all down this year, and that could be part of the reason. That, along with the continuous enrollment, where students don't have to come through RDS as often. That sort of segue into another thing I wanted to mention. The releases, I looked back over the 2 releases we've done since our last call, and I realized I haven't sent an email to the listserv, and that's because pretty much everything in there has been an operational change. So there hasn't been a whole lot of change as far as anything you would see. One thing we did do is updated some of our contact information out there on the school repository to reflect that Jean Ritter is now in the position that Kimberly used to be in. And we also need to update that Elizabeth McDuffie, we need to replace her with Andrea Poole. But we do have some updated contact information out there. We also have posted, and I did send this out on the listserv, the new call center hours for the RDS student call center. We were looking at the numbers of the statistics and realized that we could shorten our hours during the week. So instead of being until 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, we're going to be till 6 p.m. and then till 5 p.m. on Friday. We will bump those back up to the longer hours during our peak time and during college application week. So we should be fully covered on the call center. The only other thing I wanted to mention, and it's not really specifically for this audience, is that it's more financial aid related. For the state grant portal, we're going to start requiring an in-state determination from RDS prior to dispersing any state grant funds. In the past, that was up to the financial aid office to make sure that didn't happen. Now that everybody is on RDS and has been for several years, then we figured, any students that were grandfathered through on a prior school determination should be mostly out of the system. So if there are any that are still in there that never did RDS, are going to need to complete RDS. So that's just the main change for the state grant program starting for 21-22. It's not going to enforce any deadlines since we don't know exactly, what those all might be. And that's pretty much it. We're still all working remote, and everything is still working out well for us in regards to that. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Tracy. And while we're pausing to see if there's any other questions for Tracy, I just want to remind everybody that I did send an email reminder last night that has both the PDF of the slides and also those quarterly stats that Tracy was referring to. So that should be in your inbox early from last night. Tracy, I do have one question before we see if there's any other questions for you. Is there any way that you're aware of that a college could attempt to identify people who are still currently enrolled and are benefiting from the grandfathering and have not gone through RDS yet? Is there any way that you know of that we could identify those potential students so we could kind of get in front of,
Yeah,
them needing to get RDS?
I know how it can be done through the state grants portal. I'm not as familiar with how it might be done within colleague on the registration side. But I can inform the financial aid offices on how they can identify them in the state grants portal.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say that if it might be good for those of you on this call to have a conversation with your financial aid director to make sure that they understand how to identify students who may be potentially impacted by the change in the grandfathering position. And if they need any assistance, that financial aid director can contact you.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions or comments?
I have a
Yes.
suggestion on that too is, so if these are students who have been attending long term and they were grandfathered in, they never came to RDS, the other suggestion I have would be see if you can run a query to identify anyone currently enrolled who doesn't have an RCN number in the record.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Gene. That's a good suggestion. Any other questions or comments for Tracy from an RDS perspective? All right, thank you, everybody. And so now we're moving into our SEAA updates, and thank you, Tracy, for those updates. We appreciate that. For those of you following along on your PDF, that means we're on slide number 10. And so, Gene, I'll be quiet and turn the mic over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. As most of you know, I moved from the position at RDS as the supervisor to replace Kimberly Remsen, who retired. So unfortunately, I guess you're still stuck with me, but I'm still around as a resource if you need to answer any policy or campus-based issues. In terms of the appeals, it is on the statistics page that Tracy sent out, but I did want to mention we had 6 in the last quarter. It's kind of typical. I did want to mention I've been looking through the numbers that come to SEA, which is really a very tiny percentage. And the overwhelming majority are students who came here from out of state and are attending a 4-year, and they're trying to make a case for, well, I've been living here a year now, can't I get in-state tuition, which they'd have to demonstrate independence. Out of the 6 that came through, I mean, all of them were upheld by SEAA as, they felt it was the correct decision. 4 clearly were in that category of attending a 4-year. They came here to go to school. They're in their 2nd year trying to demonstrate independence, but weren't successful. We only had 1 that clearly identified in a community college, and that's kind of typical ratio. And then the issues that are keeping them out are either the 12-month duration or immigration status is not eligible. Those are the big blocks, but it's a very small percentage coming to that are overall, but the SEA appeals that are community college students, the overwhelming majority are that. And most of the issues they present, it's not like it was a complex situation in the family or something. It's they disagree with, for example, the 12-month legal requirement. You have to be here 12 months before you're eligible, or they disagree with why they should have to have immigration statuses, that there's really not much leeway in terms of state law to make an exception. Had several questions recently, and I want to just touch briefly on these about, what are we doing to help students that, are having a problem getting documentation because of COVID, or if the students are moving or going between residences. It's similar to me to what happens when there's a hurricane and we say, well, they can't be in their house. They're living temporarily with a family member in South Carolina. I think that's the key issue is it temporary, or are they making a permanent change? If they are temporarily living somewhere else and continuing online classes, that's fine. There's no need to put them on a grace period. The grace period applies when they've indicated a change. Now, if that student starts to change all of their license, where they're paying taxes and everything, at some point that change would probably be permanent. But if they've been enrolled already and they are indicating that it's temporary, you don't have to worry about that. The grace period would apply if they're saying, it just didn't work out, I lost my job, and now I've had to move permanently somewhere else. Then the campus can look at a grace period. With regard to, and this is for students who didn't have a determination up front, this is happening more with the 4 years, I think, that the student said, oh, well, I moved here, 2 years ago, but I can't get a driver's license or anything because of COVID. Well, we've had some do that. They've been saying they've been here 2 or 3 years and they can't get a driver's license because of COVID. Well, you got to make an appointment, but COVID wasn't around 3 years ago. So that really doesn't fly. But one document, if you have someone like that who's moved here within the year, one document is not going to make a difference in terms of the timing. If you have other things to show and there's a reasonable progression saying it took me 2 months to get an appointment, they would be fine in terms of how RDS would approach. It doesn't all have to be on the same day, but not changing anything. Like we have one like that now for one of the 4 years. The student's been here 3 years, has never changed anything. FAFSA still shows another state. They're trying to blame it on I can't get my driver's license because of COVID. So we look for the big picture. So that shouldn't, affect those students. This kind of came up about effective, and sometimes we're asked, is there a way we can backdate? No, RDS makes the determination based on the submit date. It's at that point the institutional policy takes over about what's the effective term. And we leave it that way because, for example, the UNC 2 years ago went to a unified policy for the whole system. They have so many days from the beginning of the term. So it's not possible for us to backdate, and there are many cases why, or reasons why, but I mean, for example, a student may have moved here, at the first time they came through, it wasn't 12 months and now it is. Well, they really wouldn't have met it, if we backdated it. So we have to go by the date submitted. So we can't, but at that point we pass on that date and it's your policies that determine the effective term.
Gene, can I jump in there for a second?
Sure.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. Could you talk a little bit about the difference between how the difference between a initial decision and the date, how that might change if there's a reclassification or an appeal, because that initial date does not always, there's some differences between the effective date for a reconsideration versus an appeal, is that correct?
Yeah, yes. And that's one reason, for example, we set a time limit on appeals, because generally on an initial consideration or a reconsideration, that's your effect. On a reconsideration, what a student's saying is either something changed, or I failed to give you more information, or I didn't turn in a document I was supposed to. We have to go by what we see today. On an appeal, the student is appealing their most recent decision. So then, yes, we could look at the effective date really being, we have the date at which the appeal was filed, but it would be reasonable to go back to, let's say, they're appealing their reconsideration. That doesn't go back for years. They have a 10-day window to submit an appeal. Because after that, come a year later saying, well, it's changed now, I want to appeal it. Well, that's a change in circumstance. It's not that the determination may have been wrong that you're appealing. That's a change of circumstance. So we're talking about potentially up to a 10-day difference or less an appeal that would make a difference of the date.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and mention this. This is really primarily a financial aid issue, but we're still getting questions years later about, there was a federal law change. It was RDS aware of it, about like Chapter 35 for veterans benefits and whatnot. There is a choice going into effect, a change going into effect for the Veterans Choice Act. So who this would apply to is, we always try to put someone through and see if they're eligible for regular residency criteria. If a veteran is not but has or a dependent or spouse, but has a benefit they can use, are provisions in the federal legislation, the Veterans Choice Act, to allow for an adjustment to in-state tuition if they're using the benefit. Currently, the law restricts, there's several requirements, but to a 3-year window following their discharge. So I have one now at one of the universities that is charged 10 years ago and wants an adjustment. Unfortunately, the current law won't do that. That's not RS, it's not North Carolina law. That was set in federal legislation. They're making an amendment to that. So effective August 1st, someone benefit and is a veteran or eligible spouse or has a benefit they can use, if they have a benefit they can use and is awarded and fills out the paperwork and is approved for, that will no longer be restricted to a 3-year window. The RDS is aware of this. We're going to look at the interview they go through to change the language to inform them, but in no way change our criteria for whether they met the in-state classification. We will pass that on as we do currently as a flag for the college universities information. Effective August 1st, if they are eligible and awarded, there will no longer be that 3-year window. It would be open-ended as long as they have a benefit they could use. But then we'll get a lot of questions, so I went ahead and put that on there just to make you aware of it. That's something your financial aid folks would handle. Okay.
Gene, I'm going to step in there as well, if
Yeah.
that's all right. And so, as you guys know, participants, is that I believe, and I'd like to pause there a little bit, if it's all right, Gene. So I believe that the workflow would be that the registrar or admissions office would apply because that student still is out of state from RDS, right?
Correct. If they're
So
in
then,
state, it's not going to matter. Bypass.
Right, right. So, but from RDS, we receive a classification of out of state for that veteran. Is that correct?
Correct. Correct.
So that means that the college would have to adjust the charges to in-state, and we do that by applying the student type, or a specific student type that adjusts those charges. And so that would happen in the registrar's or admissions office. Am I thinking correctly there, participants, that that's something you guys would do?
Well, let me just clarify, though, it's not based on them merely having been a veteran or a dependent. They have to have an award. If they have used up all of their funders.
Exactly. So if they no longer are eligible for the VA benefit, then they're no eligible for this adjustment to their charges.
Correct. It's similar to the current arrangement. It's no longer a 3-year maximum time frame. It's open-ended now.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So I'm hearing from Heather in the chat box, and other people may want to chime in. I'll leave it up to you. But basically, they get notified from the VA benefits office that somebody's eligible for the benefits, but their charges currently show out of state. And that's when they apply the appropriate student type and do the rebill, so that way the student's charges are adjusted appropriately. Is that the typical? Does anybody on the line today have a different process other than what Heather has described there? Yeah, I'm not hearing anything differently, so I'm assuming, and I think that that's probably very similar across all the campuses. So the major change that I think Gene is describing here is that now the 3-year rule as part of that eligibility requirement will go away effective August 2021.
Right.
All right, so Gene, here comes our favorite topic we've been wrestling with here for several months. I'll let you go ahead and introduce it, and then I'll talk a little more about it as far as the system office update. So,
Right. I'll just hand it off to you. Let me preface it by saying, this is involving some proposed legislative changes. Our does monitor that with our legal team. There are some others that have been submitted from other sectors already. It's too early to even, speculate. I mean, so far, the ones I'm aware of would all involve, if it goes through both houses and if it gets enacted, they would involve campus-based exceptions. For example, someone has proposed if active duty military station here and someone's in high school and they apply for admission to North Carolina College University, but before they start classes, the parents get transferred to state, they still keep in the state. I mean, currently, if they're not enrolled prior to the parent leaving, they would not be eligible. There's a proposal. Someone's trying to say, well, can they just, as long as they went to high school here at some point, can they, that kind of thing. Who knows? I mean, we'll monitor it and see what happens, but some of these bills don't make it very far. So rather than getting all worked out, we do monitor. Sometimes in the past, people said, have you heard? I heard there's someone's introduced a law or something. We do monitor all these things and we'll let you all know. But so far, all of them would involve a campus exception. So just wanted to preface that. And moving on to the next one here is there was an SCA appeal that involved a lot of discussion about minors and parents and when students became independent and some of the criteria. It triggered a legal review at the SCA and of some case law and some other things. As a result, there was quite a discussion about someone when they're 18 immediately can depend on one is really a 12-month waiting period if they don't want to parent or guardian or otherwise qualify for an exception. And the legal guidance was probably not. If they wanted to establish they may well have to wait till 19. That's in a nutshell, unless they qualify for some exception. So exceptions would be where the state turned 18 or emancipation through court order or certain scenarios. But your typical student saying, I want to be considered independent. Let me mention, this is like the number one from high school counselors, but they're not living with their parents. They don't have to be living with their parents from our perspective, as long as we can either determine they've been living with an adult relative long-term, such as grandmother, or the parent. We can verify through lookups that the parents are in fact residing in North Carolina. They don't have to be living with them. So this would probably be a smaller number who tell us they don't want to or don't have or can't provide any parent information. Sometimes students are reluctant for immigration issues, but if they're a U.S. citizen, then we can find a way to, get around that, and we usually do. We've had parents incarcerated. If we know that, we can verify and we can move forward. So with this, there's been this over a long period of time with ECAC and others about, based on this guidance, what do we need to do? So looking to the future, a possible change, one remedy would be to allow for a certain type of an exception in law. And at this point, I'll hand that off to you to JW to pick up, unless you want me to see if there's any other questions and other issues before I kind of sign off. I am available to you all. My contact information is in this slide. If you have anything regarding a campus-based exception or a policy, I'm happy to help or troubleshoot. If it's day-to-day, like what's the status of this ICRC appeal, continue to call the RDS folks there, because they'd be more on top of that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gene. I appreciate that. Are there any questions for Jean other than the 18-year-olds and their inability to establish independence as an 18-year-old, even if they're a public high school graduate? Um, and any questions other than that topic? Because I'll cover that a little more, and then we'll open up for questions on that topic in a minute. I do have one question in the chat box, Jean. It is there any updates on the House Bill 319, which would allow in-state tuition for DACA students? I'm not hearing that there's any momentum there, but that doesn't mean much.
At the moment, none. There have been an increasing number of states, I think it's up to 15, that have some sort of a provision, as a waiver or something. Thus far, there hasn't been a lot of interest in that being picked up and moved forward, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Jean. Any other questions for Jean on any of the topics other than the 18-year-old issue? All right, I'm not hearing any or seeing any. Thank you, Jean, and welcome aboard. We're glad to have you in this new role. If you don't mind, we might stay on the line just a little longer to see if there's any questions. I think Tracy has done the same, but
Sure.
I'll go ahead.
Sure.
Thank you, Jean. I appreciate that. And so I'm going to go ahead and deal with this 18-year-old issue a little more. And so if you're on your PDF, we're on slide number 12. So basically, because of case law that was discovered by RDS attorneys and verified, I need to say, by our system office attorney as well, and also Mary Shuping in government relations, she's an attorney as well. It was agreed that basically the 12-month clock requirement cannot begin before the age of 18. That's the layman's way that I kind of interpret that. So once you turn 18, then that 12-month clock can begin ticking, which means that your year that you're 18 years old means that you could not establish residency because you could not even be considered independent, because a minor by definition cannot be independent. So that's kind of the predicament that we found ourselves in. As you may recall, a couple of years ago, we worked hard to get into the legislation that being a public high school graduate in North Carolina would be weighed highly in the determination factors for residency, which basically resulted in a higher number of 18-year-olds receiving in-state residency classification, even as an 18-year-old. However, that high school criteria, so to speak, doesn't outweigh the being a minority, not minority, a minor, excuse me. So we still we're in a predicament then. RDS has been very helpful in doing some research for us. And we've identified over the past year or so, basically a year, that approximately 1,500 students across the state, across all sectors, so not just community college, but that would be the UNCs and the privates as well. So across all sectors and across the whole state, there's around 1,500 18-year-olds that probably benefited from the high school criteria, but would not benefit in the future because of this case law interpretation. So John Harris, Mary Shuping, myself, and a few others, we've been working very hard to come up with a resolution for those 1,500 students from a community college perspective. There's not a lot of interest on the UNC side or on the independent sides to address this, but on the community college side, we're very interested in coming up with a solution for this. So we've already began working with senators and representatives and drafting a bill that will basically apply a new community college exemption that would be specifically for this group of students. So this would only be a community college exemption if approved. It would not be one of the more general exemptions like for the military or so forth. So you may recall that on a former slide, we had the public high school exemption and the question from Joyce about lawfully admitted and legally admitted and so forth. You may recall in that public high school graduate exemption for community college students, a U.S. citizen is not eligible because they weren't lawfully admitted. They were born here. So in working with the Senate, or a couple of senators, excuse me, we have identified that instead of adjusting that exemption, that a brand new exemption would be proposed. That would be basically a public high school exemption only for 18-year-olds and only for U.S. citizens. And you can see at the bottom or the second paragraph in this slide, on slide number 12, that basically they have to be a high school graduate from either North Carolina Public High School or homeschool, and they were classified out of state. It doesn't make sense to, give them exemption if they're in state already. But if they're classified out of state, they're a recent high school graduate and they have attended that high school for at least 1 year, then there will be an exemption that you could apply to that person for only 1 academic year. And so they graduate high school June 2021, and they fall into this category. If this is approved, then there would be a student type that you could apply at the local level that would be effective for fall 21, spring 22, summer 22. But then after that, the student would have to have established residency because the exemption would then be null, and so would the student type. That is still under proposal. Let me make sure that that's loud and clear. This is still proposed and still has not even gone through the Senate yet. But we're hopeful that we'll be able to move fairly quickly in getting this exemption. There seems to be support, definitely from the President's Association, but definitely from the system office. And also it seems that there seems to be support in the Senate and the House as well to help us with this exemption.
JW.
I'm going to pause there to see what questions you might have.
JW, this is Joyce. Is it possible that they can lift that 1 year requirement? Because we have students who are 17 and 16 that are graduating from high school.
You mean 1 year from
the time they graduate? Because they won't be 18 until well after that year if they graduate when they're 16 or 17. Or can it be put that it's 1 year after from the date they turn 18, 1 full year?
Yeah.
Something like that instead.
I'll check on that. This has been beat up and wordsmithed a lot over the past couple of months, so I don't know for sure what my success will be, but I'll definitely put that down as a
Thank you.
request. Yeah. Any other questions? One question that I do have, and I don't know if Tracy, if you're still on the phone, or Jean, you might be able to answer this. If I remember correctly, in our last HECAC meeting, the RDS interview will not make this effective until maybe in either late spring, like April sometime or something like that. I can't recall. Tracy, are you on the line, or Jean, do you know when RDS is looking at adjusting its interview to implement the case law?
We kind of got it on hold, JW. We're working on it. I think we're kind of waiting to see what happens. I'll definitely let you know if it starts to go in.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Tracy. And we appreciate RDS and SCAA supporting us in the request to delay the implementation of that to give us time to work on this draft bill. So thank you to both those groups. Okay, I'm surprised, but I'm not hearing any other questions on the 18-year-old and minor issue with the high school graduates. In general, I'll just kind of pause to see if there's any questions. Well, you might be typing or trying to unmute yourself. I always like to highlight the RDS staff website, call center, and RDS campus support information to make sure you have that emails and phone numbers handy. So friends, any questions or comments before we end today? I know we're a little over an hour and I apologize for that. Okay, friends. Well, thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your work in serving our students. Thank you for your diligence, and thank you for your passion to take care of your students and to help them to be successful. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to email either myself or Monty, Jean, or Tracy, and we'll do our best to serve you so you can continue to serve your students. You guys have a great day now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.